picked another text. That was way too easy, wasn't it? Let me begin by saying we're going to, first of all, let me encourage all of us. One of the great ways to start off the new year for any Christian is to go through the book of Acts. And I say that because that's the gold standard for the church. And sometimes we forget what that's supposed to be like. What is a sort of a paradigm that we can sort of base church on? And that's it. And so I encourage you, go through the book. It's not a long book. I mean, compared to the Gospel of Luke, he wrote both of them. It's fairly short. But for the next 4 weeks, we want to talk about a subject called Koinonia. Everybody say Koinonia. Excellent. Very good. Which is kind of funny because when I had sent it to Marie, and don't tell her I said this, okay? I know how well that'll work. She asked me, she said, "What's that word?" I was like, we talked back and forth, open door, "What's that word?" I was like, "What word? What are you talking about?" She said, on this sermon thing, "What's that word?" And I said, "Koinonia." And she goes, "Oh, that's how you say it." I said, "Yeah." And she said, like I said, don't tell her I said this. She said, "I thought that was Japanese." And I'm thinking, okay, she's blonde. And I said, "I thought it." Didn't say it. I thought it. Okay. So I said, "Well, it's actually Greek." And she goes, "Oh." She said, "Well, I'm just a little Southern girl." And then I said, "And Baptist." I really shouldn't have done that. I was terrible. Yeah, and y'all are probably thinking, he's gonna make her leave us. No, I've tried for 6 years and it hasn't worked. Koinonia. There is no English word for koinonia. Basically, the common word, it appears 20 times in the New Testament. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot when you think how much smaller the New Testament is compared to the Old Testament. 20 times of any subject in the New Testament is significant. So it's a significant word, but there is no English single word equivalent for it. 18 out of the 20 times in the New Testament is just basically translated fellowship. Fellowship. And the very first appearance of the word koinonia in the New Testament is exactly what Don read for us. They, meaning the church devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, the koinonia, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Now, what amazes me about that is that when you think about the launching of the church, the beginning of the church, the first verb to emerge from the birth of the church is devotion. Devotion. And that word devotion, let me give you, this comes from Thayer's Greek lexicon, which is considered one of the most accurate translators of the Greek language. That word devotion means this: to adhere to be steadfastly attached to, or to give unremitting care to someone or something. From the beginning, we got to understand this. It's important. The church was devoted to, first of all, learning from leaders. Let me just camp on that for just a second. You can find tons of books written all over the place, whether you're talking about business, whether you're talking about psychology, whether you are talking about spirituality. You can find tons of books about leadership. what you will not find a book written on is followership. So they were devoted to learning from their leaders. They were devoted to the fellowship, or to koinonia. They were devoted to the sharing of basic necessities of life, no matter whether it was food or water or clothing or emotional or spiritual companionship and support. But they were devoted to the basic necessities, and they were devoted to praying. And if you take that word, what that all means is they were deeply, deeply, deeply connected to each other at every level. It was a kind of devotion, if you will, that benefited others, but it also benefited you. You gave and you received. The early church had a koinonia, not just with themselves. They had koinonia. They had deep, abiding attachment and fellowship to Jesus. Now, Paul, some 10 or perhaps 15 years later, writes us a kind of an example of what that is like at that present time. And he's writing to a church in Philippi. And he kind of defines this whole thing with lots of words, but you'll love the way he puts this, about koinonia. He writes to them, he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, and who wouldn't? If any comfort from His love, and who wouldn't? If any fellowship with the Holy Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit, one in purpose. Koinonia is a team-first approach to living together, to living like Jesus for others, to bless people, to encourage people, to support people. And this is just not a good suggestion. I mean, this is not something that people would list as being a good preference to have. We are commanded in the New Testament. Now, if you want to take some scriptural notations, this would be a good place to do it, but you don't have to. And this is just a small capsule of where we find this koinonia process taking place in the New Testament. Scriptures command us to be devoted to one another and honor one another, Romans 12:10. To live in harmony with one another, Romans 12:16 and 1 Peter 3:8. To accept one another, Romans 15:7. To serve one another in love, Galatians 5:13. To be kind and compassionate to one another, Colossians 3:16. To encourage one another, isn't that important? Encourage one another, 1 Thessalonians 5:11 and Hebrews 3:13. Spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Some translations say provoke one another towards love and good deeds. I mean, if you're going to provoke somebody, wouldn't that be a good provocation? That's from Hebrews 10:24. Offer hospitality, 1 Peter 4:9. And lastly, but certainly not the most important, but certainly one of the most important, love one another. Love one another. And that comes from 1 Peter 1:22, 1 John 3:11, 3:23, 4:27, and 4:11-12. John had a lot to say about love. There is no I in team, they say. There is no I in church. You see, we live in an I world, don't we? iPhone, iPod, iPad, iMac. We live in a consumer-based world. We have products and services that we purchase and we consume that are absolutely tailor-made to our personal preferences and desires. And we have become so self-absorbed and so self-focused, we become furious if we are discomforted, denied, or delayed in any manner whatsoever. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about this past Christmas, just circulating through the stores and just trying to get out of the stores. We are devoted to our own personal needs. We were at Lake Junaluska back in 1995 when we had the greatest gift that year. Leonard Sweet. Anybody here know Leonard Sweet? A few people. You know, you can get, for those of you who are on Facebook, you can't, he's already maxed out the people that can be his friend. Not really, but I mean on Facebook, okay? But if you want to like him, all you can do is give him a thumbs up and you still get feeds from him. He is an absolute gift to the United Methodist Church and really to this world in the name of Christ. And he blessed us so much that year at Prayer and Bible Conference. And that year, he had come out with this brand new book in 1995 called Faithquakes. Faithquakes. Now, let's remember 1995. I mean, that's been not so long ago, but about 18, 19 years ago. But you see, in terms of technology, that's like light years ago. And in 95, at that point, the internet was literally exploding. Hundreds of websites were appearing brand new every day. People were beginning to shop on the internet, to get things off the internet. .com companies were just absolutely happening left and right. Personal computers at that point in time were dropping in price and becoming affordable to just about everybody. If you wanted a computer, you could probably manage a way of getting one for yourself in that time. And also, it was interesting to me that at that particular point in time, that satellite TV was just beginning to really rocket off. It was beginning to eclipse cable TV at that point in time. In a sense, we were beginning to believe and to think that this whole world was getting smaller. And we were so connected, the word global began to be used almost in redundant terms. I mean, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, but you could email somebody, and if they were reasonably close to a computer at that point in time, they could email you right back, and it didn't matter where they were on the face of the earth. If they got your email and were aware of it, they could get back to you. We're talking about a matter of minutes across this entire globe. I mean, the idea of connectivity was beginning to reach epic proportions, or so we thought. That's what we believed in. And the futurists at that time were saying to us, they were saying, this is going to bring us closer together. Now, in his book, Faithquakes, so you guys thought I had forgotten about that. In his book, Faithquakes, Leonard Sweet talked about a real person whose name was, you won't believe this, Faith Popcorn. That's her real name. Now, if you don't believe me, you can get on the internet and you can look up Faith Popcorn and you'll find out that she is a consultant in what is known as the futurists. She pulls data together, and based on the data she pulls together, she makes projections. And what Faith Popcorn was saying at that particular point in time was totally against the mainstream of what people thought was happening. Not that we were going to be closer together, but Faith Popcorn said was, this technology is absolutely isolating us more and more and more. She came up with a term called nesting. A trend, she would say, which would increase and increase and increase. Nesting was defined this way. People who lived outside of metropolitan areas would go into work, would drive themselves all alone in their car, to go into the office to work in a cubicle where they were isolated from everybody else for 8 hours, go back home, go into what she called their cave, on their internet, on their personal computer, order their favorite meal from their favorite restaurant and have it delivered to their house as they sat on their couch and from their satellite TV watched HBO. Isolated, all alone, yet electronically connected to the world. Now here we are in the 21st century. And you know what? We're devoted to ourselves. You can see it everywhere you go. People on a 4x6. We want what we are absolutely convinced that we deserve. We are, again, devoted to our personal preferences. And as we look back and get to study the book of Acts, we wonder why the church back then looked so different than the church that we have now. The answer is utterly simple. We do not share the same devotion. It seems the more we try to satisfy ourselves, the less content we become. As consumers, we have so much. And in the process, we have become less appreciative of other human beings. I don't know. Maybe if we're willing to, we could take a lesson from an apostle. Paul, in 2 Corinthians 8:5, is writing about the church. And you have to realize, at that point in time, this is just a decade or so removed from Pentecost. And the expectation and the practice of Koinonia was at a really, really, really high level. And so Paul's writing to Corinth about a church, the church of Macedonia. It was a scattered bunch of house churches, that they just called the Church of Macedonia. This is what he says about them. They exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God, they gave themselves to us. Did you get the teaching? Because Paul is teaching us that the way that we get beyond what we currently expect is to give ourselves first to who? Give ourselves first to who? To the Lord. Give ourselves first to who? The Lord. If we have not devoted ourselves to the Lord first, we will not give ourselves to the koinonia of the church later. We will have little faith in koinonia or the fellowship of the church. Koinonia is deeply connected at all levels of the church. Begins with Jesus. If in our relationship to Jesus we want to debate and argue and dismiss and prefer something different that Jesus is trying to lead us to, do you think that it's going to be any different when we enter into the fellowship of the church and they ask us something that we are not comfortable with? They don't speak to us. It massages our personal needs and preferences. It is Jesus who initiates koinonia, true, deeply connected fellowship with us. He started that. He loves us when we are so unlovable. His grace flowed to us before we even knew Him. He encourages us. He blesses us. Oh my gosh. He forgives us as far as the east is the west of every one of our sins in His name. He is so merciful to us. That's why over and over and over, the psalmists who didn't know Jesus but knew God talk about God's loving kindness. Jesus initiates all that stuff towards us, and the hope that we will be devoted to initiate the same attitude and gestures towards each other in His name. Wow. It's a brand new year. It's our first communion together for a new year. And the people that sit beside us and behind us, in front of us, are all part of this thing